Welcome to the new automation mindset, where AI, automation, and integration come together. Successful automation is so much more than technology, it's a mindset. On this podcast, we're here to learn about this mindset from innovative leaders who actually practice it every single day. From Fortune 500 companies to the boldest startups, these leaders have reduced cost, crafted experience, and fueled growth with automation. They have transformed their companies and their careers. I'm your host, Markus Zirn, and as Chief Strategy Officer and part of the founding executive team at Workato, it is my mission to find these top innovators in AI, automation, and integration and share their journeys with all of you. You may notice that this show matches the title of the Wall Street Journal and USA Today best-selling book, The New Automation Mindset by our Workato CEO, Vijay Tella. You'll hear references to the key ideas of this book, the growth, process, and scale mindsets throughout the show. If you'd like to explore them further, be sure to check out the book in hard copy or on Kindle. So today, we're pleased to have with us Gabe Enright. He's the Principal Integration Architect at Vodafone. Gabe himself has a long history of leading integration projects at large telcos, banks, airlines, and that spans the UK and Australia. Specifically at Vodafone, he also leads emerging technology adoption. So he partners with companies like Workato, but also HashiCorp, Cloudflare, MongoDB, all those kinds of leading edge technology vendors. His global leadership encompasses Vodafone's large distributed IT organization, and that spans centers in Egypt, in Cairo, and also in Romania. Today, Gabe will share with us what he himself calls the shift left strategy at Vodafone. It's really about how he initiated a democratization of integration and automation and was able to motivate the larger Vodafone IT team to learn Workato on their own. That's pretty exciting. So let's dive right into this conversation with Gabe. Gabe, well, first of all, it's a pleasure to have you here on the podcast, you and Vodafone. I really appreciate it. And obviously, we want to learn from you. You want to kind of get the audience a feeling of what you do with automation and AI and so on. So let's kick this off. To start off, really wanted to talk kind of about your philosophy. Let's start at the very top, right? Let's talk about the 30,000 foot level. And you're familiar with our point of view, Workato's point of view, right? You've seen the book, the new automation mindset and so on. What's your automation philosophy? Any strategy? I mean, you've got a long career in integration and automation. How do you think about automation?
Yeah, so I'm Principal Integration Architect. Integration, the key term there. Automation's quite new to us, as it is to most businesses. We're going beyond the integrations, beyond projects, beyond tasks now. We're starting to think holistically about our processes and how we can streamline those. So our philosophy is simple. We've got three tenets to our strategic goals, and they're around our customer, they're around simplifying the business, and they're around growing the business. And you can see there that there's a good mapping to enterprise automation. That's what it gives us. We can respond to customers more quickly and with more agility in a standardized way. We can simplify our business, take out the complexity using automation. That's less decisions people have to make on the move as they're doing business. And the last one's growth. You know, we have incredible scale with over 300 million customers in Europe, 300 million customers in Africa. So the problems or challenges that we have, they're too big for people to solve. So automation is really a necessity if we want to achieve our strategic goals, Marcus.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. You know Massimo, right? Massimo Pessini, our head of research. He always says, you know, the way he looks at it is he says like integration and automation is kind of two sides of the same coin. Because if you think about the automation, you're automating business processes. Every business process that you automate, it reaches into existing business systems, and that's where you integrate. So it's kind of a little bit one of the same things. Would you agree, or do you feel like there's a slight difference about it?
Well, I think they're symbiotic, the integration and the automation. Integration really is the tentacles where we reach across the systems and make connections to where the data is and where the functionality is. And automation really is the outcome we're trying to achieve. We're trying to use those connections and orchestrate different processes end to end. So yeah, they are very, very much aligned, and I don't think you can have one without the other, Marcus, because the holistic effect is that yes, we can automate and we can orchestrate, but we need to be able to touch those endpoints. So that's where the integration comes into play.
And it seems like what I heard from you was really, I mean, given the scale of things at Vodafone, right? What you guys have to achieve, it's really about the speed. I think you mentioned agility. Is that the key challenge for you guys? There's just so much to do, so much to integrate, so much to automate, and how do I get that done in a reasonable amount of time, huh?
Well, that's exactly right. We can't scale using people. It's just not feasible. If you think of us doing a billing run on a day and doing millions and millions and millions of bills just in one day, how can you get people to do that? So we need to be smarter, and we need to build in ways that we can automate that process, and then we can do a lot in concurrency. We can generate millions of bills at once in the one bill run. We can issue them to customers. We can accept payments in on those types of volumes. So, and that's just one side of the business. Then you've got the operational side of the business, where we've got tens of thousands of applications and interfaces that all need to be working together in real time for us to achieve our goals. We're also in a very, very competitive industry. And being able to respond with agility, to the day-to-day business is vital for us in staying ahead of the competition. And then we have parts of the business where there are no humans involved. We have the largest IoT network in the world, so at 118 million devices and counting. So none of those have human intervention. Now, how do we scale those and make them effective? By using people. We just can't. So automation is really key to our success.
So if we talked before, right? And then I think you mentioned to me like how you guys are scaling out Workato, enabling people kind of in many different regions of the world. I mean, this isn't just in the UK. I mean, this is like, I think you have a development center in Cairo, right, in Egypt, and there's something in Eastern Europe also. How have you gone about that? How did you achieve scale that a large amount of people can actually automate and integrate? What's your strategy to that?
Yeah. So we're on a journey there. But we have 22 local markets. We've got over 100 partner networks as well, and the nuances of those, they're all in different languages. So there's your first challenge. How do we make them contextual to the local place that we have to operate? They are standard in most cases across the business, but it's that localization piece that's very, very difficult. And that's driven us to be working in silos. And that's what we want to get away with. Enterprise automation and integration at that level, where we can introduce things like multilingual type responses is vital for us for that standardization. Or otherwise we have to do the same thing 22 different times in 22 different languages. So you can see the complexity that builds up on top of that. So we're a truly global business. And we're in parts of the world where there's huge diversity in language, in regulation, in all aspects of dealing with the customer and serving them a product.
No, makes sense. Look, we talked about integration. We talked about automation. The brand new thing is AI, right? And this is probably a little early to ask that, but we believe, at least at Workato, our point of view is that AI will make automation even more powerful. injected, kind of infused in the right places and so on, it'll bring the best out of automation, and it'll create a whole new level of fluidity that kind of hasn't existed before. How do you think about that? Are you guys thinking about AI at Vodafone, and to what extent does that mix up with automation?
Yeah, so it's very early days for AI within the business. There's a lot of people reticent to put it next to a customer at the moment. What's it going to say? What outcomes are you going to get? How do you test that? So AI for us is really a co-pilot type arrangement at the moment. The other great thing about integration automation is it's a very, very good tier to inject AI, because you're doing discrete tasks. Yeah, and we can call AI into those orchestrations when we need it, when we need to cycle through large volumes of data and produce an outcome very, very quickly and in near real time. That's where AI can be used. But it doesn't work just putting it in the middle of your IT and having AI solve everything. It still requires the collective imagination of our people to drive it, to put it into the right areas of the business, to point it in the right direction, to train our models and things. So we're on the start of that journey. It's very early days yet. We had our CEO, Margarita, went round to all the hyperscalers, and she asked, what are the other telecommunication companies doing with AI? What are the banks doing with AI? And resoundingly, the response was nothing as yet, right? Because we're still in this age of infancy, and we're trying to develop a plan for infusing AI into the organisations. It's really in that discovery work. But what I will say is that the way Wakata was introduced AI with respect to the co-pilot and having our developers being able to use it to generate recipes and generate smart orchestrations, right? They're the first sprouts, if you like, of using AI within our business.
No, it makes total sense. I think we're all learning together at the moment. I mean, if we're honest with each other, this is only like 6 months old, right? The whole thing with Gen AI, but it is coming furiously at us. So it's kind of interesting. I mean, look, the way some people have told me, like, what Workato, what automation does, it connects the dots. And, in the old way, the dots are business systems, business applications that you connect and you weave a process across. It almost feels to me, if you place the new kind of dot, which is the AI dot, and almost think of it like it's the golden dot. If you place it like strategically at the right moment in the process, you can actually really accomplish a lot. You can create some real wow moment. It's just that, I mean, you're absolutely right. It's all still a journey. It's not like anyone has fully figured it out.
Yeah. And it's also how you position AI within the enterprise. AI is not an application. If you think of it like that, it's going to be very, very difficult to understand what outcomes you'll get with AI. But if you consider it to be another person or another worker, someone interacting with the applications, you've already got a good basis for governing it, for securing it through role-based access. And also, it's the thing that does the thinking, just like the person, right? But it relies on other tools like enterprise automation tools to do the work. So that's the blend I think we need to get right. And what's really going to make it effective is humans pointing it in the right direction, solving the right challenges, training that model. That's how we'll get to a nirvana with AI if we ever do get there, Markus. So that's the way we're viewing it. It seems to be working well. We're getting some good outcomes off some early trials. I think we've got 75 proof of concepts on AI at the moment. But there's a human team behind it, putting some real thought into how we leverage it within our processes and within our business. So, automation's a team sport, and AI needs to be a team player rather than being an application in its own right. Does that make sense?
No, I think No, I think that's very fair. I think that's a good point. The one expression I've heard, it's a digital brain. It's just like another brain, like a human brain. It's just this time it's digital, and it sits in there. It makes decisions, and these decisions help with the flow of the business processes at the end of the day.
And that's key. Also, and that resonates with my earlier point that if you treat it as another solution actor, if you like, which is an architectural term in the mix, it can have a very good impact as it plays a role. If you just treat it as an isolated application, then it's very, very hard to predict what's going to be the outcome. So that's how we're thinking of it, where, it's another role in the organization. We can reuse all the security and privacy that we have around dealing with people, give it the same rights within applications, which might be read-only on some applications, so it can't do any damage with our data. Right? And if we have that paradigm and then we point it at the right jobs and the right tasks, I think that's where we're going to get the outcome with AI.
Perfect. All right. Well, I'd say like enough of the theory. Let's get into the practice. Let's talk about some use cases. Really curious. I mean, you guys are a big organization, as you mentioned, like 22 countries, right? You got big call centers that deal with customers. You got a humongous network. What kind of automation use cases are there at Vodafone? I don't know, what are your top three, or what are the ones that really are exciting you?
Yeah, so the first point is automation works across all areas and all aspects of the business, be it back office, be it operations, be it with the customer. My focus is really around operations and service management, ITSM, and our three biggest use cases are incidents. We have 2.5 million incidents a month across the group. That's just the ones we know about. Problems, when you have an incident, it's usually because there's a problem. We need to identify the problem, and we need to route that problem to people who can fix it, right? So out of the 2.5 million, we might have 200,000 problems come from that. And then we've got to make the change, which is the third use case, where we fix the problem and then we need to push that code back into production. And a good tenet of IT is to know what you've done and what changes you've made to your baseline, so that if anything goes wrong, you can unpick those. So the three are related. There's some big numbers there, 2.5 million, 200,000 problems that would turn into 200,000 changes. So if you could imagine if we were trying to manage that with paper and people, right, it would just overwhelm us, right? So what we do is our goal really with operations is to be zero touch. And zero touch operations means we identify the incident, we find the root cause, we push the problem out to the right team or the right process that can fix them, right? And then we push that change into production. So most of those, and the goal is to have zero human touch. And that allows us to work at the scale that we have at Vodafone.
That's great. I think earlier you talked about complexity, right? So, yes. I mean, you guys have tremendous complexity in telco. I've worked a little bit in telco, this is decades back, but I remember, unfortunately, often as the customer, you almost like experience some of that complexity when you call and you're going on. There's multiple systems and so on. How do you deal with that? Is automation useful to maybe mask some of that complexity?
Well, I mentioned before a key tenet of our strategy is simplicity, which I think is nearly the opposite of complexity. So we're a hugely complex business, and telecommunication in general has been pretty lousy at pushing that complexity out to our customers. When you sign up to a telco product, there's gigabits, there's minutes, there's all these sort of things. Now, you have to manage that yourself as an individual. That's probably the wrong approach because, what's a gigabit to the average man in the street, man or woman in the street? Well, who knows, So we want to reduce the complexity that goes out to our customers. But the nature of the business is it is complex. And when we provision bundles and things like that, there is complexity. So in abstracting away the complexity from the user, we can put the complexity into the automation. So that can deal with the different permutations based on the scenarios or circumstances of the sale or the operation of the service. So it's a very, very good tool to abstract away the complexity from the customer, but the nature of the business is complex. So at some tier, you need complexity, and the automation tier is a great place to handle that.
So if you think kind of about automation and a little bit on the lighter side, I know you have a long history. I think it wasn't just telco, right? I think you worked in financial services also, integrating and so on. Any like funny stories? Anything where automation integration maybe ran into some challenges you didn't expect? Maybe something that surprised you? Is there?
Yeah. So look, it sounds great on paper to have a tool like Workato enter into our business technically, but we have a lot of developers, a lot of very, very technical people that are used to doing things at a source code level. So there was a lot of apprehension to a low code tool coming in and doing these things. So that was the first challenge. Your team was fantastic in giving us demos and getting those people to get hands on and to try the tool out. And for them to assess themselves whether, it was going to be a good thing for their role in the organization. So the side of that was I have a team in Cairo that does all our integration for service management. There's about maybe 400, 500 people there just for that piece. And they were the ones that really, really need to adopt the technology as their hands-on. So I introduced Workato, and I got a bit of a cold response, and I thought, well, let's get these people into the tool. And Grant in the UK, he organised them all accounts, and he ran some sessions with them and orientated them to the technologies. And then I run a technical design authority, which is to get these people together to talk through the technical issues on a frequent type basis. So the first one, it was a bit frosty. The second one, I said, look, you guys have seen the tool now. What do you think? And we got consensus. They liked it. They could see the potential of it. We do a very narrow thing, and they could see that it would broaden our base out for the internal customers we could service. And then I came back to the third TDA, which was probably about 5 or 6 weeks later, and they said, okay, Gabe, where's the use cases? And I said, well, what use cases are you talking about? And I said, all the use cases we're going to do in Workato. And I said, look, hang on, it's early days yet. You haven't been trained and we haven't introduced the tool. And they said, that's not true, Gabe. We've all gone to the Workato Academy and we've all done the certification. So what had actually happened, we went from that position of them being very reticent to the technology to all upskilling themselves so that they could take on the new body of work and they could diversify their roles. And once they got on that journey, I was actually quite impressed that that volume of engineers had gone out in their own time because they could see the future because of the way we introduced the technology. That skilled themselves all up and they were ready to go. But the business wasn't ready to go, so I had to stem the enthusiasm, if you like. But since then, we've had a methodical approach, right, to defining where the automation can be used, how to define a use case, what are the preconditions and the post conditions, what systems we need to interact with. So yeah, they're fully on the journey now, but it was actually quite I won't say funny, but it was quite rewarding for me to see that they'd gone out and trained themselves up in this new technology, which hasn't happened for any technology at Vodafone. It's always a big challenge to change the baseline. But this was a tool that they just took to immediately. They trained themselves up and they were away. And they were beating on the desk for the business, Marcus, but I didn't have that ready. I didn't expect that outcome from them.
Little boomerang, I guess it came right back to you, huh? So now the pressure is on you. Very good, very good. And then you said, like, I mean, we're talking like hundreds of people. So this is there's almost like a movement going on with people, joining in automation. Is that usual? Is that what happened before at Vodafone, or is that at that scale of people? Is that a new thing?
No, that's quite new phenomena, and it's not just in the developers. 400's my team. At the end of the day, we nearly have 40,000 engineers across, networks, operations, BSS type applications. So this is only the first pod. And word spreads fast. Wikado's quite a buzzword now in all the engineering meetings. It's a buzzword in middle management. It's a buzzword now up at senior management. So from those humble beginnings, it's really grown to be something that the business depends on now. We're starting to get to the position where we're depending on Wikado to be successful in how we implement it, because we've had so many challenges doing it ourselves, just in raw source code and writing microservices and getting them right. This takes all that thinking away, the low code. The other big shift, and I'll come to shift left in a minute, is we're able to get citizen developers on board. Citizen automators, I'll call them. They're not quite developers, but they can generate their own automations. So if you leave the business people or the citizen automators with a problem and a challenge, they'll do 90% of the work. And then it's for our engineers to get involved, to understand that what they've developed is scalable, it's standard, it's got reuse, and it can be rolled out to the business. So that's what's happening now. And as I said, Wikado's quite the buzzword. Anyone who has a problem, the Wikado comes into the conversation somewhere along the line. So I'm just hoping we don't get overwhelmed by the amount of interest that we have. We need to put some rigor around how we adopt it, but definitely the passion's there and definitely the enthusiasm's there.
I mean, it's great. It's great to hear. It seems like you're really well prepared. The technical people, and also not just the, most technical developers, but also kind of like the second and third line of defense. The more citizen developers are getting into it. I'm not sure. I mean, I mentioned that I worked a little in telco decades ago. Actually, what I did, I'm not sure if we talked about this, I did process reengineering. So I was actually on the functional side, not IT, but I was in the business side, on the operational side, and we were drawing these kind of business processes on paper. Very much exactly. Like, Visio kind of type diagrams. But what we couldn't do is we couldn't have a really good conversation with the technical folks about how this would be implemented. My intention with Workato, with automation, was always kind of to rally around, one platform that an operational person can understand, that a technical person can understand. Not everyone has to do everything themselves. It's not a one-man sport. It's a team sport, really, but it has a rallying point. I don't know. Does that make sense? Do you see something happening like that at Vodafone?
Yes, well, we put a huge amount of emphasis on the process engineering piece, but the people who do that, really, they only come up with a diagram or, a theory or a document, right? They're not empowered to do anything. And then to get anything done, they need to shift it to a whole new group of people who don't understand the challenge from a business perspective, which has always been the chasm between IT and business. What I like about Wikado is that, it's graphical. It's a workbench. A developer or a citizen automator can develop a process, and then they can sit down and they can show the business people on the workbench the steps that they've used to get to the outcome. And that, from a clarity perspective, right, has really bridged that chasm in that we can develop something quickly, a recipe. We can show the recipe to the person who it concerns, the key stakeholder. once we get their agreement, we can get the IT into productionizing it. So that whole cycle from the conceptual and the re-engineering work that you and the team used to do to the verification and the clarity that the solution is fit for purpose, to then the implementation, the execution, is all masterfully dealt with in through the tools and the UIs that we have in Workato. So it's been a key enabler of the challenge you've just mentioned.
And then, we started the conversation with the topic of agility, right? So if you think about how in Silicon Valley software is developed, it really happens in agile teams. And those, at a most abstract level, an agile team is an engineer, of course, a product manager, which kind of is more like the operations person, right? The person who knows what the domain is, and then a QA person, a tester. And then you can really iterate around it. And, again, the idea with Workato is to give you in IT at a big company like Vodafone that same experience, just like we in Silicon Valley, like really quickly build software.
Yeah, so we've moved our whole operation to scale agile, and that works on increments of 3 months and iterations of 2 weeks, the sprint. In the traditional technology, it's very hard to get anything done in 2 weeks. So how do you break the work up to work with scaled agile? Well, it's very, very difficult, and it becomes quite fragmented. Then you've got multiple teams that have to interact on those dependencies. But the beauty of a tool like Workato low code is you can get a very meaningful thing done in 2 weeks. So what used to take you 3 months because you needed to order infrastructure and deploy applications and go through cybersecurity, now that we've done that work up front, we can have a piece of work that lasts for two weeks. We can drop that into a sprint, and we can get a very good outcome within that 2 weeks. So using a low-code tool like Workato has enabled the process and our ways of working, which is scaled agile. And I think that's what the Silicon Valley crew was good at. They were good at chunking the work up so that you could get something meaningful done in a couple of weeks. You could iterate on your product in small increments and deploy that frequently to the production environment. The traditional telco programs and bank programs and IT programs, they're big beasts. They go for 9 to 12 to 18 months. And it's only after that time that you get an outcome. They call it the big bang, right? But we've moved now to product-led. We've moved to incremental and emergent design, right? And we can implement at the pace with the agility and the cadence that you can get out of scaled agile.
No, perfect. It almost feels to me like we're already in the third section here of the podcast, which is advice. Already really good advice to the audience. But I still wanted to kind of you to step back a little bit. If you think about, so you've been on this journey with Workato now. People in your development centers are trained up. The use cases are coming. If you think about people doing automation, maybe wanting to infuse AI into these processes, integrating with the business systems, any word of advice you would give them on the journey? Like, what is there something you'd say like, that's exactly what I would do again? Maybe there's something where you'd say like, well, listen, be careful here because it might lead you in the wrong direction. Just curious, any advice for the audience here?
Yeah, most definitely. So, there's always a foundation piece to introduce a new technology into an organization around security, around privacy, around creating the connections and the integration. So get that piece right. And that's, and that will become your baseline. Once that's there, what we want to do because of our scale and volume is we want to shift that left to the customer. We want the customer to do their work. Traditionally, we've had this huge pipeline of work, right, that takes months and months and months to get through. And while you're doing that, it's getting laden again with more. So it's always been the bottleneck is having IT do the work, right? So shift left is the big concept there where IT play a governance role, We govern the platform. We make sure it's operating correctly. We add new foundational elements like connections to different systems, and then we shift left to the customer. Now, in doing that, you can't do that with every tool because not a lot of them can be understood at a business level. But the low-code tools, and especially Workato, they're built for that shift left. They're democratized. We use multi-tenancy and Automate HQ. Everyone gets their own workspace. We can share things across workspaces. People can work autonomously within their workspace without getting overwhelmed by their neighbors, as we say, and they can get their job done. So number one is shift left. Should be the goal, is to get the business and the citizen automators more involved in the work and doing the work, put the accountability and the responsibility out to them. And number two is to govern, right? And that's make sure on a daily basis everything's operating correctly, and that what you're pushing into production doesn't have adverse impacts. And if you do the foundation pieces right and you apply the governance right, then there's no reason why every department within Vodafone, all those local markets, they all have complexity within themselves. But with using the multi-tenancy of Workato, we can deal with all that. We can hive off parts of the tool, give them to specialist functions where they can operate autonomously in a world that's governed to our standards and doesn't impact our ability to trade or our ability to operate the platforms.
I mean, it makes total sense. Look, I'm hearing this from a lot of IT organizations, especially in the larger companies, to be honest. I think, if we look back, Gabriel, and you and I, we've done integration for a while. Integration used to be something that was actually fairly centralized. Very few people in a company handled, almost all the volume of the integration load. And, we've seen that this work with Workato. If you have, especially like a fast growing company, it can become like a huge bottleneck. I mean, if you're a large company like Vodafone, it can become a really big bottleneck. And it seems to me like for you, the low-code automation, low-code integration platform like Workato really is a way to rethink, right? Is a way to break away from that traditional, more centralized model of dealing with it and doing it more decentralized. Basically pushing it back to the people who actually might know the processes better or are in the regions and so on. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, most definitely. So centralization, there used to be a theory that if we centralize things, they're going to be easier to manage and they're going to be less expensive, which is not always the case. And now we've come nearly 180 degrees on that, where decentralization, right, allows us to do more because we decentralize the work out of that team. We have a term at Vodafone for centralized platforms. It's when we get degradation. That's when one customer on the platform or one process on the platform, right, has an impact on the others. So, you could imagine that, if someone's doing something at high volume and takes all the compute resources out of the platform, then all the other customers get a degradation in their service. So distributed computing now, and the way Workato uses AWS and the native components that are naturally decentralized and distributed, it allows us to service workloads, right, without impacting other workloads. They can work and develop the code in autonomy, right, and they can deploy the code, and then the code can operate, right, in autonomy without being degraded by the neighbors that is inherent to a centralized SOA or integration platform. It's also the complexity. You can't decentralize if it's too complex and only a few people in the organization can do it. Right? You still need to be central because the team's central and the skills base is central. Right? So in having a low-code tool and our citizen automators out there, we can decentralize the work. and we can decentralize the efforts and the ideas and the imagination to produce better outcomes for our customers, to make business simpler, right, and to then drive the growth that we're after.
So it seems like there's two things really that give you the level of comfort to make that happen. First, it has to be low code in a way, otherwise only a few people could do it. With low code, you can give it out to more people. And then on the other hand, obviously, if it's in just free flowing Wild West, decentralized, that also doesn't make any sense, right? There's got to be central governance across all these people. So I think it's these two people, being low code and having the right amount of a central governance across these decentralized teams. Is that fair to say?
Exactly. Decentralize the tool and centralize the governance, because governance is works across everything. Everyone should be on the same playing field. But what we do need to do is decentralize the effort to produce, the services, and also decentralize the execution, so that we don't get degradations across different, one person's execution impacts the other. So there still is a little centralization, but that's in the operation, and that makes sense, because if you centralize just that piece of it, you can have less people there. So everyone's on the right track with those thoughts.
Perfect. And you know what? I mean, let's finish up on this one, because I think that's a good one. If I'm like thinking back of our conversation here, last 45 minutes or so, I think the shift left is one of those things that really sticks in my brain. Be honest. I mean, if you think about the audience on the call, and they're thinking about automating, they're thinking about integrating, they're thinking about maybe using AI. I would say the nugget here from talking to you, and what they should remember is like they should think shift left, meaning that, maybe it doesn't have to be that central team like it always used to be. Maybe there's other people that can get involved, and maybe those people actually, happen to know the operational processes even better, and they're closer to the region, and then they're governed by a central operational team that makes sure that no mistakes are made, or maybe no issues are developing, that prototypes are properly put into production, and so on. But I think in the world that we're in, with that speed, the speed that we notice now at how AI is also coming at it, I don't think, without thinking shift left, I don't think we're going to be able to handle all that volume. Yeah,
that's exactly
right. Well, thank
right.
you, Gabe. Thank you, Gabe. Really, really awesome to have you on the call here today. Learn from you, and I think there's going to be so much more to learn from all the customers we have using Workato for automation, for integration, and then infusing AI. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much for having me, Markus.
Thank you all so much for tuning into today's The New Automation Mindset, where AI, automation, and integration come together. If you want to learn more about the key topics we covered in the show, you can find them in the book, The New Automation Mindset, by our Workato CDO, Vijay Tella. Also, leave us a comment and let us know what you thought of today's conversations. And don't forget to subscribe so you will never miss an episode. I'll see you next time.